Welcome to the Obvious Leadership Podcast, where we dive into practical leadership insights that are, well, obvious. Your hosts have walked the talk, and now they're sharing their knowledge, strategies, and advice. Let's jump into today's episode and explore the world of leadership with your hosts, Joey and Omar.
This is what, our 14th episode now?
I think so.
Right? So almost 2 months worth of episodes. So that's pretty nice.
Yeah. It's a pretty big milestone, man.
Yeah, for you guys that don't know, we do 2 episodes a week. Right now we've been posting, I think, about 3 a week till we get caught up. So if you guys are wondering, right, that's kind of what we're at, what we're looking at. And welcome to the Obvious Podcast, right? Where we talk leadership and we talk pain points and, try to see what we can do to help you understand where you're at in your leadership journey and kind of maybe some of the downsides and shortcomings that we have as leaders. Because we can't get better and we can't become better leaders without understanding where we're at. And I don't care what you say, if you think that you're 100% where you need to be at every single day, every single time, there are a lot of shortcomings that your team are dealing with. And unfortunately, you're probably the cause of a lot of those headaches.
Yeah, most definitely, man. I think, one of the things that you learn, and one of the things I learned as a leader was becoming self-aware of how I'm feeling day in and day out, right? Because people can feed off of that. And sometimes you're the problem for the problems that arise with your people. And it's hard to really kind of come to that realization. But you definitely have to, kind of look at the cause and effect of things around you.
Yeah, big time. Like obviously going through stuff is never fun, right? For you guys who've been paying attention the last couple of episodes, I'm out here back home in California. I live in Texas, and I'm helping my pops go through some chemo and radiation, right? Always not the fun stuff, but all of that affects your performance as a leader, just like it does as individual contributors. And understanding where you're at and understanding when you need to take time aside to, take care of what really matters and allow your team to be able to flourish on their own. Because that's part of what we talked about as well, if you watched the previous episodes, is ensuring that your team can step up in your absence. Because if your team can't do that and they're relying on you, that's poor leadership. You're managing and you're trying to manage people instead of actually leading them to become better at what they're doing. And ultimately to be able to replace you, because the goal is for you not to just get replaced, it's to be able to get promoted. And you can only really do that if your leadership understands that you also have a plan for them in place to be able to have somebody take up your mantle once you, step up, right?
It's definitely a different story when you have a team full of leaders, right? And that's the end goal, right? I mean, of course, we want to be performers. We all want to be, the top of our game, the top of the market, however you want to put it, right? But
Yep.
Honestly, like you can't just focus on that, because that's kind of what holds you back as a leader, right?
Yes.
If you're one-sided, if you're focused only on one thing, your people can see that, right? And then they don't feel appreciated for what they feel is important. So, you be a leader and make sure that you are showing some kind of neutrality when it comes to the different objectives that are out there, so that you can make sure that your people are also being neutral to the things that are out there.
Well, it's not just that. It's also being a leader. You have more than just obviously leading your people, right? You as a leader, you're still a manager. So you still have managerial duties. You still have processes that still need to get taken care of on the back end. Leadership is one of the many hats that you're going to wear, and it's going to be the most prominent one. But you're also going to have to ensure that you make time for everything else. And that becomes very tough when, especially for a new leader, when all you've been focused on is I just need to hit these numbers. I just need to hit these numbers. Yes, cool. And we say this a lot, right? Especially on the leadership side. It's not just about what we sell; it's also how much sticks, right? We have churn. We have, obviously all of us deal with some sort of fraud. We don't want to. But it's the world that we live in. So I don't care if I'm selling, five, six, $700,000 or $1 million a month. If I'm losing 80% of that on the back end because of mismanagement of inventory, because of fraud, chargebacks, all this stuff, right? And that's where the company also looks at. It's not how much you sell, but how much sticks on the back end, because that's really what's more important, because that's what's going to run the business, right? And as a leader, understand that, especially when you're first stepping into that leadership role, understanding the differences of, I need to, make sure my team hits numbers, but I also have to manage all these other stuff that's going to take up my time. And that's where a lot of people tend to have the first misstep, because they come in, it's like, I need to hit this, I need to hit this, I need to hit this. Cool. Because your team, your leadership is going to be bugging that. And I know, Joey, that we've talked about this. They're constantly on you, like, why is this down? What's going on with this? Right. Obviously, flavors change every single week as to what's popular and what's not. But a given is that all the managerial stuff, all the administrative stuff, you got that handled. And here's the kicker. Most companies aren't going to teach you how to be an actual effective leader. Even worse, not really going to teach you how to do the managerial portion that you got to take care of, right? And especially if you're like at a smaller operation, it's one of those harder to deal with items, because you have to figure out a process that's going to work.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, so as a leader, like, for some of the people out there, they're probably wondering, well, how do you notice when you're in that position, right, where you've got so many things on your plate, and like, how do you know what to tackle next, right? As a leader, like, what do you think is the approach?
So and I know this is going to ruffle a lot of feathers because it's not a very popular opinion, but it's learning how to be able to prioritize your time. And what I mean by that, and I know it sounds super vague, right? I'm only going to put in X amount of hours a week to get this done. If it doesn't get done, then I'm prioritizing my time and efforts poorly. I shouldn't be spending 100 hours a week managing my store location or anything like that. If I'm understaffed, obviously that's a different conversation, but that still means I need to get staffed in one way or the other, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what I hear you saying, like, even though you want to be a leader, but your title is a manager, like, you can't just sit there and quote unquote lead your people 100% of the time, because there's other things behind the door that you need to take care of, right? Exactly. So you have to pick the right times to influence your people, and also you got to pick the right time to take care of the things that you need to do as a manager.
Yep. And I know, especially if you're new, if you're young, you're going to be like, well, I'm going to put in, X amount of hours extra to make sure all this stuff gets taken care of. And yeah, you know what, you can do that, but that's going to lead to burnout. And by burning yourself out, you start to become a less effective leader, and your team is also going to notice that, right? Because at that point, okay, well, this manager will step up, this leader will step in and take care of all the extra stuff that needs to get taken care of that I can't do, right?
Well, I mean, honestly, like, that's one of those examples, right? As a leader, there are things that are thrown your way that's going to throw you off course, right? And you have to be able to rebound as quickly as you can, so that you can, kind of display that behavior to your people, right? And a lot of that kind of, it's like how you deal with the frustration of being overwhelmed, how you deal with the frustration of, basically goals that are not reachable at this point in time, right? Because you haven't gotten your people, educated enough to get you to where you need to be. Like, there's always going to be two sides to a story, right? But how do you find the middle ground and get your mind right so that you can take care of what needs to be taken care of to make the most progress?
And that's always going to be the rock, right? Because yeah, there are going to be plenty of different approaches, and you're going to find, and you're going to have to look for the approach that's going to work best for you. And it's never going to be this single approach is going to work 100% of the time. It's going to be parts of different approaches are going to work for my personality, for my leadership style, my management style. And it's understanding different aspects and seeing how you can adapt all of that into your own, right? At the end of the day, like if you're an individual contributor, it is great to be a problem solver. If you're a leader, problem solving isn't the only thing, right? There's going to be a lot more to that. And a lot of that's going to come to adaptability. Are you able to adapt on the fly with changes in a way that's not going to be disruptive to what you have going on, right?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think problem solving is only a part of it, but like I take that in a different context because everything to me is a problem. So, and the reason I say that is because like everything needs improvement, right? And I'm never satisfied with where I am in a particular area, right? But like you said, you have to prioritize, what you're going to be focusing on, and you can't just focus on one thing all the time because then you just come monotonous to your people.
You got to understand when good enough is good enough so that you can move on to something else, right?
Yeah, right.
And that's a big thing. Like imagine being so nitpicky, being a micromanager where this isn't done correctly, this isn't done, this isn't done, this isn't done. And you do that so often, not just to yourself, but also to your team, that it pushes everything back instead of understanding, you know what, this particular KPI, this is good enough. It's not a big impactor, right? Let's move on to this one where if we can move that needle by 3 to 5% minimum, right?
Yeah.
As a whole, as an individual, whatever the case is, that's going to be a much greater impact than if we did 10% on this KPI because of a lot of different things. If you understand KPIs, you understand that every KPI has a different weight. And yes, if you want to be best in class, there's certain things you want to work on, but because of the difference in weight, that also, not a lot of people truly understand this part, the difference in weight also equates to the revenue side.
Yeah.
The bigger impactors weight-wise are also the bigger contributors to the revenue than the smaller ones. So that's what you need to understand when to be able to drop the, all right, I need to micromanage, I need this to be perfect, to this is good enough. These are the bigger ones for us to focus on and put our efforts on. And as a leader, when you're not able to be on there constantly alongside your team, shadowing, observing, coaching, and training, because you have to take care of this inventory. You need to be offsite to help out another location, another leader for training purposes. You got PTO you need to take care of. You have to be away from the store, away from the locations for a certain period of time. There are things that are going to pop up, and you need to understand that I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to be there like a hawk, and I shouldn't have that expectation as a leader. As a manager, you typically do. As a leader, you need to lead your people to that success to be able to have them step up, right?
And I mean, but one thing to add to that is, like you kind of ask yourself, and you said micromanager, man. It's like, well, how do I know if I'm a micromanager, right? And so when you basically have, somebody completing a task, and you're asked. So talking about micromanagement, man, like I guess it's like you have to be self-aware of what you're doing to your people and what you're. So I mean, like I was saying, like you're a micromanager when you're double checking everybody's work and you're bogging yourself down with everybody else's work. That only creates more work for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, imagine being the nitpicker, right? This isn't finished. This isn't good enough. Somebody says, "All right, I'm finished." Cool. Now, most people think about that when they're thinking like maybe small, like fixed fixtures, this like that, right? I'm talking more like from a performance standpoint, as far as you're looking at, say, numbers. You're doing a weekly, monthly, quarterly check-in, and you're looking at the KPIs. cool, we got room for improvement. Instead of nitpicking every single little thing that they have wrong, you obviously step in, act as a leader, showcase their wins, talk about areas that they have for improvement, and you focus on, no more than like 3 areas to focus on. They could have 10 different areas that they need to focus on, right? You only really focus on 3 that are going to be the most impactful, not every single little one. And as a new leader, you're going to struggle with that because you're going to be like, well, I would improve here, I would do this, and you're going to go down the line item. That's not how people work. Think of them just like your customers. You can't give them a buffet of options and expect them to be able to choose. It's going to be information overload. The exact same thing happens to your team. Now, there's a flip side to that. Do you know that, Joe?
No. What are you talking about?
So we're talking about, us as the leader, right? Micromanaging people. But you also do that to yourself, right? Like, okay. And Joy, I think sometimes you're like that to yourself because you bring it up, right? Like, I got to make sure this is perfect. This is done exactly. And what happens is that waste time, right? When you get caught up on this one little task, you have more important things on the back end that shouldn't be on the back end, right? They're on the back burner. They got to be front and center because that's what's going to be the most effective to what you're trying to accomplish. Whether that's pushing numbers, pushing KPIs, or whether that's setting up a new fixture, setting up a new location, right? Got to focus on what's going to be the most impactful at that moment, and then delegate the rest to either other people or to different times that aren't going to be so disruptive. Right?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to something we've talked about before is, are you within that framework of how that behavior or how that interaction is supposed to go, right? Because if you're within that framework and you have the result that you need to do, that you need to get, then I feel like you're on the right track. And you need to pay a little bit of attention to what's going on, but you don't need to stop and you need to start all over, right? You have to make sure that you are, ready to roll with the way that you're rolling, right? And hopefully you're rolling in the right direction, but you can't sit there and stop things just to, double check and nitpick. And because, when you do that to the behaviors that you're trying to get out of somebody, then they might get burned out, right? They might get tired of you just like beating them up and talking about, like, what are they doing wrong? Like sometimes it's like, hey, great job. Like, let's do it again next time. Right. And that's where those observations comes in. Maybe that's the time that you micromanage, right? And because you're attention to a lot of those different things. But when you're coming to, like an overall performance, I feel like you have to make sure that you are looking at the overall performance, not necessarily the itty bitty things that could be going your way. And I think one thing that I did as a leader when I was first a leader is that I wanted to make everybody just like me, right? I wanted to, right? And and I was struggling. I was like, man, why aren't people like doing it the way I would do it, right? And but they would perform.
We can try. We could keep trying. Up to you, or we might have to table this one because I have no idea what's going on with the connection.
And that brings us to the end of today's Obvious Leadership episode. Remember, every great leader starts with one step, and you're already on your way. Small changes lead to significant impact. Until next time, keep leading with purpose, and remember that leadership is the key to unlocking extraordinary results.